All right, hello everybody. Happy Friday. We are going to be focusing in today on humanistic and cognitive theories is the name of the section. We're really focused on the humanistic part of that. And so the first question that we're going to deal with is what is the thinking behind humanistic psychology? We'll kind of get into what that approach is all about. And then you should be able to describe Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then last, we will talk about Carl Rogers' ideas about personality. So those are kind of our three focus questions for today. So let's get into it. Humanistic psychology is an alternative to psychoanalysis. We've been spending the first part of this unit focused in on Freud and Neo-Freudians and some of these people that are really in that realm of psychoanalysis, talking about the unconscious mind. And the critics of the critics of psychoanalysis say that let me try this again. The critics of psychoanalysis say psychoanalysis is overly deterministic. Deterministic means that your behaviors are determined by things outside of your control, like these urges, like the unconscious mind, like these things you don't really have access to, things from your childhood that then keep you stuck in problems as an adult. Humanistic psychologists say that that's overly deterministic, meaning that it's taking away too much of your power. It says down at the bottom that they embrace the idea of free will, that people have the ability to choose their own destiny, that we all make choices, and those choices are what determine the behaviors that we engage in. Humanistic psychology is focused more on psychological health instead of mental illness. If you read Freud, a lot of his work is case studies with people who have a variety of disorders, hysteria, he talked quite a bit about, and these mental illnesses that were problematic for people of that day. And that's how he generates a lot of his ideas about how people think. But if your starting point is mental illness, the humanistic psychologists say that leads to an emphasis on, some of these other kinds of issues, and is what gets us into this place where we're focused on problem behaviors. If you focus on psychological health and you emphasize human potential, you have a much more optimistic take on psychology, and it changes the way you think about personality and changes the way you think about human behavior. Today, I don't know that anybody would call themselves a humanistic psychologist, but there is a movement today called positive psychology that I would say humanistic psychology is kind of a forerunner to that. And so there are lots of psychologists today that have the same kind of focus on more of the positive side and the potential piece. How do we get people to optimize their lives and their personality? So that's what humanistic psychology is all about. We're going to focus on two people. The first is Abraham Maslow. And what we know best about Maslow is this hierarchy of needs. And chances are you've seen this before because it shows up in lots of contexts. He was a psychologist who studied positive human qualities. In 1954, he creates this when he writes a book on personality. And, a lot of people have grabbed this idea and have used this in all kinds of contexts. It shows up if you are going into teaching. It shows up quite a bit in the work that we do to train to be teachers. It shows up in other contexts. So the gist of this is that the needs at the bottom of the pyramid need to be met before we can work our way to needs higher up on the pyramid. So my physiological needs need to be met before I am focused in on safety needs. My safety needs need to be met before I'm focused on love and belonging needs. So if I am not seeing lower level needs met, I can't get to the top of the pyramid, which Maslow calls self-actualization. And that's defined as a person's motivation to reach his or her full potential. So reaching full potential, how do I become the person, the best person I can be, is Maslow's question. He says you have to have these other needs met before you can even think about those kinds of things. So what's living in this top part of the pyramid? Creativity, morality, spontaneity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts. These are people that are self-actualized, are being their best selves, and they're able to do the things that are here. But he says you can't focus on that kind of thing unless these lower level needs are being met. So the very bottom, we have the physiological needs. Physiological means physical, right? So the most basic things that are keeping you alive. Next up is safety needs. This means security of your body, of resources, so you can actually take care of things you need to take care of. Health is related to safety. Property needs are safety. All of these things that you can kind of live your life and not have to worry about, access to basic safety. Above that is love and belongingness, and that could be everything from friendships to, a romantic partner, and family relationships. Everything in between fits into love and belongingness needs. Esteem needs are above that. That includes self-esteem. We'll talk more about that today. Confidence, achievement, the respect of others, the respect by others. So at the basis of this idea is the concept that if let's say I don't have access to food, okay, I'm not worried about my self-esteem. I'm not worried if other people respect me. What I'm worried about is I need food because I need to survive, right? If these needs are being met and that is stable, your physiological needs are stable, then you can work your way up the pyramid. If I have to go home and I am not sure about security, like if I live in a place where my physical security is threatened, again, the things that are higher up in here are not my top priority. My top priority is I need to keep myself safe. So this concept, this all connects. So to try to get people to the top level here means that we have to focus in on some of those other needs. I want to point out that school is really a lot of what we do is focused in here, right? Achievement, confidence, developing skills, being able to be competent in terms of the kinds of work that we're doing at school. That's in the esteem part of the pyramid. So, the thing that we talk about and we are concerned about as teachers and as, people working in a school, we have lots of kids that are coming in, and we know that some of these lower level needs are not being reliably met or not being met on a regular basis. I mean, we have a program called Brain Power in a Backpack that is a food program for kids on the weekend because, the information is that there are kids that are food insecure, and, the school lunch is actually a critical part of how they're, getting through the week. On the weekend, when there's no school lunch, it's a problem. So Brain Power in a Backpack, we just had a food drive partly for that program, and that's to make sure that kids are getting what they need on the weekend. Those kinds of things are in place because we know that if those needs are not met, we can't get you up here to working on achievement and developing the kinds of school skills. Belongingness needs. This is why we have advisory. This is why we encourage kids to be in groups. This is why we do all kinds of things to get students to feel like they belong to the high school in the sense that they're part of a community. If that feeling is not there, if you feel alienated at school, again, you can't get up to achievement. So, this concept, I think, can explain all kinds of things. What I was going to have you do is to think about situations where the hierarchy might impact a student's performance at school or impact impact a person's performance at work? You can pause and think about that question. But I think that, a little bit of thinking can help you understand, if a person is in an abusive situation in a household, let's say there's some kind of spousal abuse or something like that, that's like safety needs are not happening at home. How does that impact that person's work? And it's going to make it more complicated for them to be focused in on the kinds of things they're doing in their job. Okay. So, the connections here are pretty clear, I think. I found this online and I thought it was funny, and I'm just wondering how many people would be like, hallelujah, Wi-Fi is at the base of the pyramid below you in physiological needs. And that's how my kids act when, God forbid, if the power goes out and they don't have access to streaming. It's like the whole world comes to a standstill. I'm not sure how many of you would agree with that, but I thought it was funny anyway. The second person that we'll talk about today is Carl Rogers. And if you read through this section, his approach is really based on the kind of therapy that he was doing, this client-centered therapy where he's working one-on-one with patients and trying to help them, improve their lives. And so some of these terms, we'll just go through them and they all kind of connect, the dots connect. Rogers says the self is one's experience or image of oneself. You might think of self-concept. This is developed through our interactions with other people. So how I see myself is partly based on the way other people treat me. Okay, so if I'm out in the world and I'm getting positive feedback and people are, interacting with me in ways that make me feel as though I'm doing a good job or I'm a good person or I'm someone they want to be around, then that helps form my image of myself. So positive regard then would be viewing oneself in a positive light due to positive feedback from interactions with others. So if I'm getting that kind of positive feedback, I'm going to think of myself in a positive way. What happens if I'm getting negative feedback? If people are treating me like I'm some kind of a problem, if people are treating me like they don't want to talk to me or interact with me, then I'm not developing positive regard. And that's where things can go wrong. If you connect back to some of the stuff we talked about yesterday, the inferiority complex, I think there's a lot of ideas that swirl around in terms of personality, people that are struggling with different parts of personality where, they're having negative responses. I think some of this might be related to the kinds of thoughts that we have about ourselves. Next term on here is conditions of worth. The conditions a person must meet in order to regard herself or himself positively. And the way that he describes this is, the idea that if I act in a particular way, then that means I'm a good person. What are the conditions that you need to meet in order to think of yourself positively? And how this plays out sometimes, particularly in families, particularly in dysfunctional relationships, is a parent could give a child the feeling that if they act in certain ways, that then they're not getting the positive feedback from the parent. They're not getting the kind of love and attention. So people will literally shut down or deny parts of themselves that don't fit in with their self-concept because it's not part of the conditions of worth. This can warp somebody pretty significantly if you're not able to be your true self or your whole self. If you have to hold back, I mean, there's hundreds of ways that this could play out. There's an example down here related to anger and how then that person has to shut down their feelings in order to try to get that positive feedback from a parent. On the other side of this is Rogers' concept of unconditional positive regard. So this is the perception that an individual's significant others value them for what or who they are. So, I found a cover of a children's book, I love you no matter what. This is the kind of book that is really trying to teach kids that from a parent's perspective, that unconditional positive regard is the thing that they're hoping for or pushing for, that really you can be your whole self, your true self, and you're loved in a family because you are, not because you're acting a certain way, not because you're getting certain grades, not because you're practicing your trumpet or whatever it is. Like, you can be who you are and you still get loved just for that. And in that kind of an environment, it can lead to what Rogers would call a fully functioning person. So that's an individual whose person and self collide. So their actual self and their self concept, the way they think of themselves, are very similar. So that's what we're going for. So Rogers is working with patients who are having, dysfunctional family situations, problems in terms of how they perceive themselves. And, oftentimes people are more critical of themselves than anybody else. But oftentimes, this is coming from some place. So working with patients to try to help them unpack that, uncover that, get to this place where they can be more fully functioning. And then, this cartoon is out there, and I've used this for years, and it's one of my favorites because it's dark and it kind of makes me laugh, even though it's dark. And I guess I have that response because I was a hockey player growing up, and I don't know if you have access to the hockey community, if you're a member of that, or if you know people who are in it. It's probably not that different from other sports things, but there are these certain dads that are pretty hardcore about sports and pretty intense. And this idea that, you have to perform a certain way in order to get the love and attention from the parent is sometimes the message that comes through, whether that's intended or not. I happen to have one of those kind of crazy intense dads. So this one is like kind of right up my alley. If you can relate, I apologize. It's too bad. I will say that as an adult, I had kids, and I made purposeful choices to be different and not be that person. So, you do have choices in what you put out into the world and how you treat your kids. So if you had that experience, you don't have to necessarily repeat that. It's worth thinking about. Couple more slides and we'll finish this up. Rogers and Maslow both argued that a successful life results from a healthy self-image. That healthy self-image they refer to as self-esteem. So the benefits of self-esteem are important according to humanistic psychologists, particularly Maslow and Rogers. If self-esteem is deflated, we view ourselves critically and we view other people critically. Low self-esteem reflects our reality, our failure in meeting challenges, our failure in surmounting difficulties. Oftentimes that unhealthy self-image is getting in the way of people doing the things that they could actually do, and it's really about the way you're thinking of yourself or your self-image. So their argument would be, if you work on your self-image, if you find ways to maybe address things that have happened and repair some of that it can actually make you more functional, and you can have a more positive outlook. This all has led to then all kinds of changes. I'm going to just go to this last slide here. Actually, let's stick right here. There's this idea called the self-serving bias, and I throw this in as just like and also. So we're talking about self-esteem being important, but there is this thing called the self-serving bias that says we accept responsibility for our good deeds and successes more than for bad deeds and failures. So there is kind of a potential for self-esteem to be problematic. If you have what is called defensive self-esteem, that kind of esteem is fragile and egotistic, meaning, I have these very positive feelings about myself, but I won't listen to criticism. Anybody that offers something that's outside of my views of myself, I just reject and don't even hear. That's different than having a secure self-esteem that's less dependent on external evaluation. If someone is confident in who they are, they can hear a criticism from someone and it doesn't break them, it doesn't shatter them. And they might actually be willing to hear that and say, this is something I didn't know, tell me more. For example, as a teacher, if I am willing to hear from students that, I did something that caused them trouble, that might make me more willing to actually work with kids as opposed to just rejecting that and saying, oh, that kid's blah, 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 right? Self-serving bias, kind of an interesting side note, especially as it relates to self-esteem. But what I wanted to end on would be the critiques of humanistic psychology. And in some cases, it says the individualism encouraged can lead to self-indulgence, selfishness, and an erosion of moral restraints. And I put a participant trophy over here. All of this stuff, this push from the humanistic psychologist, while I think it's been important, one of the side effects of this is that we have built this into all kinds of systems. I regularly hear particularly sports dads complaining that, young kids at a game, they're not keeping score, or, all of these rules to make kids feel good because we don't want anyone to have negative self-esteem, and everybody gets a trophy whether you win or lose. And I think I could kind of see two sides on this one. Part of me says, yeah, self-indulgence, selfishness, these are not things we want to promote. If we are creating kids that are entitled and feel like they always deserve to win, that's really not the world. That's not how the world plays out. At the same time, if a kid is 6 years old and he's playing t-ball, I don't know that we need to also focus in on, who won. They're not even pitching the ball at that point, right? The kids are trying to just learn how to play baseball. So why don't we just let them play, and it doesn't have to be about winning and losing? Why are we beating 6-year-olds up, as the losers, right? There's plenty of time in your life later for losing. I don't know. I'll let you think on that one as we wrap this up. The other critiques, concepts in humanistic psychology are sometimes vague and subjective and don't feel real sciencey. And I think there's something to that. Humanistic psychology also sometimes fails to appreciate the reality of our human capacity for evil. There are people that are bad people. There are serial killers. There are terrible people that take advantage of others. And, there are real problems out there. And to just say, oh, well, they have a problem with self-esteem, might be maybe less than okay in terms of response to that kind of thing. The exit ticket would have been pros and cons of humanistic theories. I'll let you think about this as we end. Should we, as a society or as parents or as teachers, should this be something that we focus on? Should we be trying to boost self-esteem in particularly young people so that they can get to fully functioning? Or, like this last slide suggested, is that part of the problem? I'll let you think on that. Maybe have a conversation with somebody today. Tell them what you're thinking about self-esteem. That's enough. I think we did plenty. I will see everybody on Monday. Have a good weekend.